Hi, Bill Barber from Poliigon here. In this video we're going to be looking at how to properly set up a Poliigon HDR image in Blender with cycles. Okay, so here we have a relatively simple scene. No materials or anything like that, we're just focusing on lighting today. And if I switch over to rendered mode, we'll see that the only lighting we're currently getting is the default background lighting, which isn't quite what we want. So I'm just going to drag this panel up here and turn this into a node editor, and then click on this little button here to jump over to the world nodes and click on use nodes. Okay, so now this background shader is defining what we get from our background lighting, and what we're going to do is plug in our HDR into this. So to do that, hold Shift A, go to texture and then environment texture, and we'll just drop that node in there and then click on open. From there we need to navigate to wherever it is we keep our HDR, or wherever it is you've downloaded the HDR. In my case I put them here, and we're going to start off by bringing in the 16K HDR. Okay, hit open image, connect that up to the background, give it a moment to load into memory, and great, so we have lighting and already that's looking quite a bit better. Now we need some controls to decide what angle this lighting is going to be coming from. So to do that, hit Shift A, go to input and then texture coordinate, place that there, and then Shift A again, vector, and then mapping node. Connect up the generated input to the vector, to the mapping node, sorry, and then from the mapping node into there. And you won't see any changes at this point, but now when we move this Z value under rotation, you can see we can rotate our HDR about and change the lighting in our scene. So now what we want to do is find some lighting that we like. Now I kind of think that something like that looks pretty good, but we have a problem. We've got the background showing through there. These buildings and whatnot don't look really in scale with the rest of our scene, but that's fine, because what we're going to do now is bring in our JPEG version of this, which will allow us to do two things. So let's duplicate by clicking on the background shader here, hit Shift and D, and that will duplicate it. Bring that down there, and then Shift A again and bring in another environment texture. Click on open, go back to that folder we were at before, and load in the JPEG version, which is a tiny little file, like so. Well, it's not that tiny, but tiny compared to the full HDR. And now at this point I'm just going to connect up I'm going to press Control Shift and click on this background, and that will connect up the JPEG instead of the HDR. And you'll notice we lose all of our lighting. That's because a JPEG image doesn't contain the same exposure range that a HDR does. It's why we use HDRs. But if I duplicate these nodes by pressing Shift D again, connect that up, it will now, what we're going to do is just focus on what we're seeing in the background, and then we'll do something to bring the lighting back. So all we want to focus on at the moment is the background. Now I don't want to rotate too far away, because if there was anything in the background, the lighting from it wouldn't match the image we're seeing. So I'm going to put it to about there, and then I'm going to rotate the X and the Y together. Just raise that up a little bit, and you'll see I'm dipping that below the shot. And now we just have this nice sky background, yeah? And if I Control Shift and click on the other shader, we've still got our HDR, which is now going to take quite a while to load again. There we go. So our lighting is still there. Now, because we're going to be using this high resolution JPEG as our backdrop, we can get away with a relatively low resolution version of our environment texture, which is just going to be providing the lighting. So if I click on that again and instead load in this 2K HDR image, you'll notice that loaded a lot quicker. And you can see it's a bit blurry in the background, but we're getting the same sort of quality of lighting and using a lot less memory. Yeah. So if I add in, by pressing Shift A, go to Shader, and then a Mix Shader, and connect both of those up to it, like so, and then press Shift A again, go to Input, and add in a light path, I can now use the various outputs from this to decide what shader is used and when. So if I use a camera ray as the mix amount, drop that in there, you'll see we're now getting the lighting from our HDR, but the background from our JPEG, whilst using barely a quarter of the memory that we were using from our original high resolution EXR. So yeah, a much better way of doing it. And we now have separate controls over the lighting and, if need be, the backdrop. Yeah. So let's just get that back to where we liked it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So in summary, we've downloaded our HDR images from polygon.com, brought in the low resolution HDR and the high resolution JPEG into Blender, configured it so we are physically seeing the high resolution JPEG, but the scene's being lit by the lower resolution HDR, and all of this has been rendered out with cycles.